Hey, well, welcome. It is week 2 of our series. We're back at group. Hope you guys are enjoying your time gathering. Love this season of groups. Week 2 of our series, Redefining Love. Last week, we talked about God as being that source of love and that it isn't just something He does, but it's who He is.
Yeah, and so this week we're going to get really practical. We're going to dive into a chapter that Paul writes in chapter 13 of Corinthians, and it lays out like this is what it looks like to love out loud and to live this stuff out. And so we'll dive into that. It should be a very practical conversation today in groups.
Correct. So if you're married, this is for you. If you're dating, this is really for you. If you're not married, but you plan to be one day, this is very much for you. So listen up. You're going to take notes today. This is going to speak to us.
Yeah,
but
because we have coworkers, we have family, we have friends, like all of that. And so open up today. We'll really be living in the entire chapter. Of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And listen, almost every time I read this chapter, I am standing in front of a bride and a groom and it's their wedding.
That's correct, yes.
And so it's almost like we called 1 Corinthians 13 the love chapter, and it's all about marriage.
Yep.
I mean, it is incredible for marriage,
Correct.
But Paul did not sit there going, I need to write this to married couples. This was to the church.
Yes.
It was to these new Christians of how do you interact with one another. So married couples, this is going to help our marriages. But the person who goes to work tomorrow, yes, this will help us. This is going to help 100%. Us be a
100%.
So
let's jump in. We're starting in 1 Corinthians 13, right out of the first verse. It's verses 1 through 3. Paul's saying, hey, we can do all the right things. He says we can speak with wisdom, we can have this strong faith, do things for the poor, right? But if we don't have love, well, then you're doing it for nothing. Like you're gaining nothing by doing these things.
Yeah, if I remember in that scripture, he pulls out even really spiritual things. And he says, if you're the most spiritual person in the world, but you're not loving somebody, like that doesn't, like imagine living and going, I'm with my wife, I'm with Joy, and we've paid the bills, and we've got the kids everywhere, and we've taken care of the chores, but we don't love one another. And Joy and I, when we do some marriage counseling, we talk about you need to live life face to face, not shoulder to shoulder. Shoulder to shoulder is, are we getting things done? Are we both operating and getting the housework done?
Yep.
Face to face is relationship. It's eyeball to eyeball. Yep. It's staring at each other. It's caring about each other. It's loving one another. And so we have to make sure that we are not living life shoulder to shoulder, that we need to be face to face.
Yeah, that's like relationship management. We're managing the relationship. That's not marriage. That's not the kind of relationship we want to have.
Yeah. And listen, in every area of life, like I know how I could be a good leader. I could be a communicator and pastor. I can go coach a team. But if I don't have love, all of those other characteristics that we have don't matter.
Correct.
And so love has to be the center of what we're doing.
Which is why Paul's so direct with the church in Corinth. They had some serious issues going on. They had division, there was pride issues, selfishness, fighting over those spiritual gifts. And he's reminded them, he's like, hey, listen, none of these things that you guys do, none of the things that we're doing in life matters if you don't love people.
Yeah, we have to. We cannot just manage our way through life. Like we have to have loving relationships. So that's those couple chapters, verses.
Yep. He continues into verse 4, and now it's like, what's this love look like? Because Paul's always the good leader, the good pastor, right? He doesn't just say, hey, here's your problem. He gives us instruction. And so in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7, he says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude, does not demand its own way, it's not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged.
Yeah, so today this is one verse I want you to go back and live in, reread this, I like to say slow read this, because love is patient. This is where it's super practical.
Yep.
Okay, I have to figure out what it looks like to be patient, to be kind, to forgive, to extend grace. Like Paul's saying, when you love is patient, love is kind. It's not jealous.
Yep.
It's not boastful. We're not figuring out who's better than who. Yeah. We're not, Joy and I talk a lot about, there's no scoreboard here,
yep,
right? We're not trying to have a higher score than the other person. Yep. And then, it needs to be completely selfless, not self-centered. So he talks about that. I want us to live in this in group. I really think this is where we can have a good conversation of what does this look like to love a 1 Corinthians chapter 13 way.
Yeah,
In our life.
in our relationships. Yeah, and I love how Paul ends that kind of passage there about love never gives up, because that's huge. Like, we live in a culture where it's really easy just to write people off, push people away. Paul says no, like whether it's marriage, friendships, parenting, every relationship, like we're not going to give up on people. Like we are going to love people continually.
Yeah, and so Paul is saying like this love has to be anchored with perseverance. We got to endure. We endure. We don't give up. So spend some time in those verses. And then he wraps up in the chapter.
Yep, talks about the permanence of love, which in verse 8 he says, prophecy and speaking in languages, unknown languages, special knowledge will become useless, but love lasts forever. So he's talking about those spiritual gifts, right? Like that we receive from God. But he says,
He's saying these are great, these are needed. Like we believe that God's going to supernaturally gift us, and he calls out some specifics, whether that's being able to pray in other languages and prophecy. He goes, those are great, but we don't need those in heaven. Those don't last forever. He says, but love is eternal.
Oh, that's so good.
And so that's why he's saying, be spiritual, and yes, be open to all the gifts of the Holy Spirit. But if we are craving I want to be able to heal people. I want to pray for someone and watch them get healed. But we don't love people.
Yeah.
If I don't love my coworker, but I want to go pray for someone at church, I have the spiritual gift of praying for people.
Yeah,
it's like, no, you got to love your coworker.
That's solid.
That's eternal. And that's what love is love lasts forever.
I even think about that as like being a dad. Like at the end of my life, the things my kids aren't going to remember, hey, all my sermons, right? Like they're not going to remember how big the church got or all the ministry, things that we did. What they will remember is how I loved them, the time I spent with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's all of us have to say at the end of our life, hopefully what we're measured by is our love for other people. How did we love one another?
Yeah, that's so good. It's the spending time together, the encouragement, and again, this isn't beyond our kids. Like we want our kids to think of us that way, but our coworkers, our neighbors, those family members, like we want them to say, man, that guy is the best encourager. That guy's he likes to just spend time listening to me. That guy loves like Jesus. Like that's who we want to be.
Yeah. So let's get practical. In group today, I think that you guys can have conversation around what does this look like to live this out? What does it look like to be patient and kind? So have real conversations. When are we not patient? What's our trigger? Making sure we're not keeping score in relationships. So have those conversations of being selfless, putting others first, loving like Jesus. Why don't you guys come up with a couple more of like, this is what it means to really love people in my life. And so create a little bit of some homework of like, okay, these are the 4 or 5 things that I need to start working on.
Yeah. And as we continue to tie these weeks together, again, this whole series is building on each other. I want us to remember that this kind of love that we're trying to live out, that Paul is asking us, challenging us to live out, this is not natural. This only happens in the supernatural, and it's because we have to first receive this love. We need God's love in us in order for us to love like this. And so we always got to go back to that source.
That's good. So God's the source of love, but then God's the creator of humanity. He puts us together with whether that's marriage or friendships and coworkers. And then everything about us needs to have a loving relationship. And so let's be 1 Corinthians 13 Christians.
Yeah, 100%. That's so good.
Let's be 1 Corinthians 13 relationships where we're loving, we're caring about one another. So hopefully you have great conversations today. This week we get into the practice. Let's get super practical on how we actually can live this out.
Yep. Back to you, group leaders. Guys, have a great session.